Hey friends, welcome to secondary, the second video of the series of how to get a 5 to a 7. In this clip, we're going to be working on rough draft, how to take that outline that we got in our last video using the 3 and 4 for a 5 or more sheet, that outline to turn it into a rough draft. And I intentionally made mistakes on that rough draft so that I could show you how to use the quick check scoring guide to make improvements as we go. So let me open up the handout. Go ahead and start sharing our screen here. Oh, let's see. Let's do just the content only this time. All right, so there's the rough draft that I came up with, but many of you might not have seen the first part. So let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and go all the way back to the beginning here. So we mentioned, and we'll just try to spend about 5 minutes reviewing. We mentioned that by the time your students get to the last question on reading, they will be transitioning over to the writing, which will be the essay that is worth 10 points, 5 from each reader. The revising will follow that. Remember, about 8 points of revising for elementary, 8 points in editing, 9 points in middle school for revising, 9 points for editing. And this is just rough estimates. I've noticed that it changes slightly from year to year, and grade level to grade level. And then in high school, 11 points of revising and 11 points of editing. So this is the last, this passage, and it just happens to be a paired passage, even though only third and fourth grade got the paired passages this past year. It's highly likely that your other grade levels will get it. And I wanted to make sure that in the elementary and secondary videos, part 1 and 2, A and B, whatever you want to call it, that I covered a paired passage for informative expository purpose of writing. And the second time, we're going to be doing a single passage with opinion argumentative. So what we have to understand is that by the time they get to the prompt page, it's going to look something like this, where it's sometimes going to have a pencil. The word prompt will be there. The 9 bullets, just as a reminder, the things that your students see right here in this portion, these 5 bullets are the 5 things to do to get a 5 from each reader. And remember, you can write right here, or you can highlight important things. I had filled this out for you in our last one, and so make sure you keep that copy. This one has just the unfinished version, so that your students can do highlighting, or you can print it out and they can do the paper strategies. Okay. So remember that the 9 bullets are on there, and what I had recommended was this, that your students are going to look for the word explain. They don't often know what to do because they can't find the prompt. So remember that what to do will probably most likely be inside of a box. And sometimes we can't ever know that. And so, uh, more than likely, it'll be a box. And what your students should look for is on what to do is remember DO is what to do, but DEW are the three words that your kids might see either describe D, explain E, and write W. So all of elementary got E, explain. Middle school got one describe, one explain, one write. High school got both explain. Okay. And as a reminder, the only one that got a paired passage that was informative expository was third, and the only uh, paired passage that was opinion argumentative was fourth grade. Okay. So not only did they make it hard for fourth grade by giving them an opinion argumentative, they made it in a paired passage format. So uh, by the time your students get to here, they've already read all of the multiple choice. And so remember, a paired passage has, 3 or 4 questions, however, depending on grade level, about one passage, 3 or 4. If you think of your hand as each hand as a passage, palm passage, uh, whether it's an article, a play, a scene, whatever that we're talking about. So what we need to understand is that make sure your kids do the reading questions first, because by the time they've done the 3 or 4 about the first selection, the 3 or 4 about the second selection, and then 3 or 4 about how they're the same or different, then they'll be ready for the uh, transition to the 10-point value that's here. And so what um, you need to remind your kids is do not work on the essay before you've done the reading questions for that. And so when I read the prompt, it said the following: explain how, keyword, who, what, when, where, why, which, how. That's the idea portion of the prompt. The experiences, plural, of the Varona family throughout rising from the ashes were similar to those of the Sariano Paez family in the Asheville flood. Now, a couple of keywords here. How, of course, is the idea part that we have to answer. And because it's two different passages, we need two different ideas and two different sets of evidence if we're talking about a secondary passage. And we'll look at that at the scoring guide. Now, throughout means uh, throughout the story, throughout the story, beginning, middle, end. So your students might look for evidence from the text two or more. And so those keywords, those specific demands of the prompt mean that they should probably find um, more than one piece of evidence from rising from the ashes, excuse me, and more than one from the Asheville flood in order to be able to have the best chance for success, because it did say throughout. But we did mention that for the 5 through 7, as long as they can do part of the passages. So basically, we came up with one piece of evidence from one and one piece of evidence from the other one, and then we explained that. That way, your students are doing what we call a partial response. So That's important to keep in mind. Okay, so then I went through there and I highlighted, because your students can highlight everything that had to do with the experiences of the of the Pies family in the, let you see all of it there. So every time it had to do, if it was just events regarding the disasters from Rising from the Ashes or the actual flood, I didn't highlight them. But if it had to do with the two families, I went ahead and highlighted them for you in both passages. That way, your students have quite a bit to pick from in terms of what they can use for evidence. So, all of that was things that had to do with the two families. And then I went over uh, I thought it would be better because TEA didn't do it for you guys. I put how to get a 3 or a 2 in one page in organization and development. And that's why I came up with the 3 and 4 for 5 or more. How do I get a 5 or more um, when you combine both graders? And so the 3 is IBC, what they mentioned for an introduction, a body, conclusion. When you fold a paper into 4 pieces, it'll be the I on part 1, this B and B, development of evidence in part 2, the development of the explanation in part 3, and transitioning between ideas, and then your conclusion and your conventions in part 4. And so I suggest that you take some time to study that. I went over it in quite a bit of detail on the previous video. But our goal for a 5 to 7 is to say, I want to be able to at least get a 1 in organization, sorry, a 1 in conventions from each grader. 1 and 1 is 2. And then hopefully at least uh, a 1 or a 2 in organization development. So when your students will look at exactly what's going to get me a 2 in conventions, sorry, a 2 in organization development, and they're not there yet, then all they have to do is change 1 or more of their content sentences to be able to move from a 1 to a 2. And I'm going to do that with you on this video. We're going to look at a rough draft, and then I'm going to use my quick check scoring guide to show you how exactly can you take a student's response and on computer, so that you teachers that have to grade a lot of essays in a very little time, you can quick check these, print them out, and you don't even really need to save them as long as your computer is attached to a printer. Okay. So I went through that, and then I went through the TEAR acronym. Let me remind you what that stood for. Back up a little bit here. All right. It was the topic. Is the topic one thing only, or is it something and something else? Are they asking whether or not something should or should not happen? Is it uh, comparing two different characters or events, how they're similar inside one passage? Are they comparing how two different characters, events, or experiences are similar in two passages? Or the last option, are they asking you how things are different? And so the reason I came up with this one was because a lot of students are mentioning the topic, but instead of basing their answer, the one of the W's that they're asking about, on evidence, which we had to do in order because of the acronym TARE, they were going straight down here and restating or rephrasing the prompt, but not actually basing it on evidence. And so, as you can see on both sides here, I have evidence about both families on both sides of the T for topic. And so this was just a quick write. And people always ask me, as I mentioned, do you want to use this as an outline or a rough draft? And the answer is always yes. Whichever one you think is going to be better for your kids, you can either put just words and phrases, or you can put like whole details, sentences, whatever's best for your students and their ability. Okay, so what you're going to see in the attachment is this completed form, these 14 pages of part A and part B for secondary. And then you'll see a separate attachment where it's blank. And you'll also receive a copy of the quick check rubric filled out for this response here, and a blank one so that you can use it for grading your own essays with your students. Okay. So we folded something into 3 parts here. Wrote 4 different things on a blank sheet of paper. And with that structure, we should be able to get a 5 or more from 2 different graders, and I'll show you how that happens. So the I here is, you can see that there's a T on the top portion. Did you mention the topic? And so there's that little T. The I, what idea or ideas do you have? And so we have one section that talks about the topic, and the second portion that talks about the idea that your students can use. Then if you go down a little bit further, the second portion, the body, is a combination of evidence, yellow, and explanation, green. You're also going to see that I can add blue evidence, blue explaining, and purple and orange, because if your students use a lot of evidence, then you want to see, as each piece of evidence is thrown out there at the reader, is the student taking the time to explain it? So I kept it simple. We put our pieces of evidence from both selections about how they're similar, and I chose some evidence about them having to leave their homes. Both families experienced the unfortunate dilemma of having to leave their homes because of the disasters that they were experiencing. And then, because you want to at least be somewhat explaining, and I was not trying to get to a 3 and not necessarily even a 2, but I want to make sure I can explain with at least one sentence using what I call the who, what, when, where, why, which, and, or how. Okay. How, who, what, when, where, why, which, how, wow. The wow is the spice, what you do to get their attention. And I'm not worried about that one on 5 to 7. You will see when we switch over to how to get an 8, 9, or 10, and in our last couple of videos, the difference between that. Okay. So the two reasons that we use that, why. So when you have to leave your home, why it's heartbreaking to know that there was nothing that either two families could do to stop the fires and flood from destroying their homes and all their belongings. Why is that important? where they were able to stay with friends and neighbors for a while, but nothing can replace uh, where you've lived and spent years and decades making memories. So if you notice the first portion of this here is paraphrasing the content, but then the student's idea comes in. Well, um, how does that affect their lives in terms of my own ideas? Clearly state your ideas, the student's ideas. So a lot of people make the mistake of when they're trying to explain here in the body, they're trying to explain with evidence. Well, if I have evidence and then I have more evidence, there's actually nothing coming from the student. So this portion here is what is supposed to be coming from your students. Okay. Then we have the last portion. And so I took this outline. So that's what we call phrases. They never got to go back to their homes. They still have each other. And so remember, the last letter of the alphabet is a Z. So think of this. If you look at me in the corner, Z is conclusion, editing, revising. So you can see here that that's at the end when you're on the last part. How are you going to transition? Conclusion, and you can either restate, rephrase, or reflect. Reflecting is higher level thinking, making personal or real world connections to what you write about. And since we're only trying to get fives, sixes, and sevens, you would teach your struggling kids just to restate or rephrase. And then the other C is conventions, editing, revising. So those are all the things, the reminders on how to get a four. So that's what we did on our last video. And I took quite a bit of time. I think it was like about an hour and a half to go through that. So I wanted you to be able to see this is the rough draft. So as you can see, these in the old days, there were 2 pages on a test, and each page had 26 lines. So if you were talking about kids who struggle with writing, either elementary students who don't have a lot of ability, you might be using this kind of page, and in the separate blank one, there's 2 pages, pages 1 through, sorry, 2 pages, and it can either be a rough draft, or if the students are going to go ahead and take the suggestions that you give them afterwards that I'll show you, then it can be the final copy. But right now we're going to be calling it a rough draft. So that's the cool thing. You can make changes on here on a paper pencil. It's very time consuming. So this is kind of a cool way. And if you notice, what I did for both my beginner and advanced, you might use this for elementary or weaker uh, middle school, secondary students. Each line is numbered so that when you're giving feedback, you can actually mention a line number in terms of a change that the student can make. Okay, so I'll break this into 2 portions, so I don't have to change one. So remember the prompt was this: how are the experiences of the Barona family similar to those of the Serrano family in the stories. Okay. So do you need to invent? Well, you need to invent something, but uh, what I was talking about was indent. Your students don't have to indent, but when you enter the first letter on every line, it's going to start over here on the left-hand side. So your students can, if you push tab, you'll see that that changes to a different page. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do is your students can 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, push the space bar 5 times, and that allows them to do what's called indentions. And so you can see I went ahead and included indentions. And so I basically have this in 4 sections. The first portion of this rough draft, 26 lines used out of the 52 possible. This was the introduction that mentions the topic and the idea/ideas. The second portion mentions the evidence. And so there's an organizational structure. There's the evidence from lines 6 through 14. And basically, I transferred most of the information from the 3 and 4 for 5 or more page over to this rough draft so your students could actually practice writing a rough draft. And I intentionally made mistakes throughout the way so that when we're done, I can give you feedback um, and show you what I did in terms of how can I improve this essay both in organization development and in conventions. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first just read through the entire essay without stopping so you can hear what it sounds like in its completed form. You're going to see certain mistakes. You're probably going to hear certain mistakes because I'm going to read it. I'm going to be reading it loudly. Remember that silence is deadly in a classroom of auditory learners. And so either have your kids so that the scores won't be so low, have them read either loudly in a classroom or group setting or softly in a partner or solo setting. All right, so first time through, we're just going to go ahead and read it so you can kind of get the gist of the entire essay. And again, you're going to see 4 indentions. The experiences of the Verona family were similar to the Soriano family in the articles Rising from the Ashes and the Asheville Flood. That's just the topic being mentioned. So you have to respond. It's called constructed response. So here's the response. They both had to leave their homes because of terrible weather related tragedies. Okay. So that was something that was similar. Now keep in mind, leaving their homes. Leaving your home is different than losing your home. And I'm going to mention that in the organization development, that something important that can improve the grade. Uh, Evidence paragraph, evidence from the text, 2 or more, because we've got 2 passages to look at. In paragraph 3 of Rising from the Ashes, and just ignore all the mistakes that you see, because I'll be addressing most of them, not all of them, because you can't always find every mistake. Now, if a student checks his or her own paper, you're going to remember or notice that they can hardly ever find anything wrong. But give them somebody else's, essay, and they're going to tear it to shreds and find lots of things. And so that's why I always feel like that students should have their essays revised and edited by you, by a partner, someone who's equal to them in ability or higher, or no, not lower. I was going to say, um, if it's the higher person, they're helping the lower kid. Okay. So the highest kids would be helping each other, or they would be getting assistance from you so that you can take theirs to the next level. That will be on our other essay on the last pages of this document. Okay. So let me get into the evidence. In paragraph 3, that's the location of rising from the ashes. The passage states Kino, her brother, Chemo, and their dad, Johnny, had to flee the inferno that was surrounding their home. So that was the leaving of the home. The other passage in paragraphs 3 and 4 of the Asheville flood, it mentions the muddy water was inching closer to their house, showing no signs of slowing down. The family had to get out before it was too late. They ended up going. Now we'll go to the second half so you can see it all at the same time. They ended up going to a neighbor's house. Okay, so that's nothing but evidence. And so you could probably get sometimes a one and a one as long as you have some sort of a conclusion down here and they skip the explanation, because I've seen that. But why not at least have one sentence of explaining? So I've gone ahead and included two for you. The reason, the why. It's heartbreaking to know that there was nothing that either of the two families could do to stop the fires and floods from destroying their homes and all of their belongings, period. The where, they were able to stay with friends and neighbors for a while, but nothing can replace where you've spent years and decades creating memories. Okay, so what I want to mention here, and we're going to talk about it in the organization suggestion when you give analytic feedback, is since this sounds like explanation of losing your home, not having to leave it, that evidence doesn't really relate to this explanation. And so if you look at me here, the B and the B, the evidence that you choose on the top has to relate to the way you're going to explain it on the bottom. And since these are only indirectly related, that's going to hurt the quality. And so I intentionally did that in the last lesson and in this rough draft so that you could see how could I help a student who kind of gets off on the wrong track. Uh, so what you'll be able to do is say, okay, well, if I'm going to be adding in, I don't need to maybe necessarily take off the fact that they had to leave their home. I could probably add a sentence or two about actually losing their home up here when you talk about evidence and after line 14. And so I could go ahead and I would probably uh, copy all of this and paste it to page 2. And that way, the suggestions for feedback where you give a little bit more evidence about actually having to lose their home. And that way, this evidence is now relevant and related. So let's go to the last part, the conclusion. Indentation, no space, double spacing between lines is not necessary. Even if they don't have the paragraphs, that won't be necessary. The positive thing that can be taken from both articles is that even though the families will never get their homes back, they still have each other. no one was injured or killed from what happened. And again, this conclusion ties more into losing their homes, not just having to leave them. So that's what the rough draft might look like using that larger form. So what I want to do is I'm going to try and place the essay side by side with the quick check scoring guide so that you can see how did I determine the grade based on uh, how it was organized, developed, and conventions. So remember something that I taught you in another video was Bugs Bunny says, "What's up, Doc?" And Doc is short for doctor. Your students are being assisted by the doctor called you, the teacher, and other students who might have different or more abilities than them. Okay. So when your students are doing feedback, one way is to say, you know what, I'm going to put my students in groups and I'll have one person in the group be good at capitalization, one good at usage, one at punctuation, one at spelling. Or you might say, okay, which person knows how to add, remove, replace, or move content? Because you want to always improve the content on one side and improve the conventions on the other. So I'm going to switch to my see how I can do this. I'm going to switch to my feedback. There's the essay that we saw, and so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you what feedback did I give for this essay. As you notice, and I'll zoom in a little bit more so you can see this. This is just one grader, so but I'm pretending to be two here. So when you look this, when you break down the scoring, if the scoring is what you might consider low, then you would probably be over here in the portion on the left hand side. These are all the attributes of a 0. A middle scoring essay would be a 1, 2 organization development. A high essay would be a 2, 3. So I call that ballpark scoring. And then, of course, low in conventions would be a 0, middle in conventions would be a 1, and high in conventions would be a 2. And then we have these little check things that you can do in terms of, because we did have pairs grades 3 through 5, but this one was pairs in 6 through end of course. Um, you can either, for one text is a 1, at least one text for a 2, and both texts for a 3. So we did pull from both texts, but because I told you it wasn't relevant and related, I would only probably give that a 1 in terms of the quality of that. So let me come up here and look and see what we checked off. This first line, the topic, idea, thesis, claim is present, but it's not always focused or easy to follow. So they do have an idea. In middle school, we might call it a controlling idea. In high school, we would call it a thesis because we're doing informative expository. So it is present, 1, 2, but it's not always focused on what it's supposed to. The second one, it's a 1, 2 paper. One would say the topic is vague, irrelevant, introduction, or conclusion. No, the conclusion was okay. It's just that when you started explaining it, you need to explain about leaving if you're going to stick to that part. So the introduction and conclusion are present, but not effective or meaningful. I checked off that one. So a two. So writing is very subjective, so you would pick one or two of these. And so as you're the grader, you can decide, okay, somebody might say that it's weak, minimal, and not always evidence. And a second one might come along and say, you know what, I really feel like it's uh, a little bit better. Or they might come over here and say that it's highly effective. And so when you have grades that are that far apart, uh, somebody is not understanding the scoring guide correctly. Now, if you are going to have two graders, sometimes what I recommend um, is having one person be just grader one, this first little box here, and the other person will put different check marks if you they will be just grader two, and it would be responding to the same response. You would be able to write the number of the student up here, or the name. You know, like if the kids don't mind, they can have their name. It would be Bill, um, the rough draft fire, and you just want to be able to fit it in there. It's just um, you wouldn't have this portion here. You would uh, you would have the number and the name. Okay, so this is number one. It's going to be the rough draft. Put that back the way that you guys will see it in the PDF file. Uh, the rough draft uh, of the fire and blood articles. Okay, so the next one, the organization is either weak, minimal, or not always evident. Yes. Some lack of clarity, flow, and a sentence to sentence connections. How are you moving from one idea? Are they connected that because the evidence from that passage didn't really connect to the way it was explained? I gave that a one. Evidence or ideas are mostly extraneous and repetitious. Not repetitious, we can say evidence is based on the text, but some of it is not explained or irrelevant. So that sounds more like the situation. You do have it, uh, but some of it, uh, they would need to be able to add information there. Insufficient pairs argument text evidence. I put that check because you would need something about having to leave their homes and lose. Grade level appropriate evidence, four pairs, and a counter for opinion. Since we're not doing opinion, it would be just that one there. And they didn't, in my opinion, it wasn't grade level appropriate because it didn't have the losing and the leaving of the homes. So then the last one you've got to decide on the word choices is, are they limited, vague use phrases or sentences, or is it some precise? So since it was some precise, I would say that that was a two. And so when you look up here, I'm going to come down here and I say, you know what? I intentionally made mistakes. And so we're just going to put all here checks in um, uh, cups all the way down across the board. Now, what you could do, let's say, you know what, I really feel like the punctuation was okay, so I'm going to take it off here. And I'll say, you know what, in punctuation, I felt like it was more of a 2 grade. So that's kind of up to you. I'm going to make sure that you guys see this, and I'll save that so I don't mess it up. All right. So then we're going to go to page 2. And so here is the feedback. And so organization development is a separate section from conventions. And so here's my feedback in organization and development. Since your explanation was more about why and where their homes were being destroyed, you need to include some evidence about both families losing their homes, not just having to leave them during the weather disasters. That evidence will relate to having to leave their homes during the tragedies and, of course, for sure afterwards. Okay. So if the student was to do that, then they could go look, and you can decide how much you want to help the student. Some people might end up telling the student where to go look, um, so that you would be able to come in here and tell them in look at, if you click on, I think it's Alt 0182, the paragraph symbol will come out. Try that again, backspace, hold down Alt with one finger, 0182, then the paragraph. In the paragraph, look at paragraph 8 in the first passage, and Alt 0182, paragraph 9 in the second one. So that's just a suggestion. I'll be taking this off so that you can see the way I left it in the PDF that you were sent. Okay, so lines 1, change, there's a spelling mistake, experiences. And so what I'll do is I'll try to go quickly through these things. So if you give this student this feedback, they can quickly go back and forth. Line 3 is a punctuation mistake where you need a quotation after fled. So let's see what we're talking about there. Because it was the name of the passage, you would want to put a quotation. Next mistake, line 6. And so you see how you're able to quickly go to the place, the location. Line 6, paragraph, spelling. Line 6, there it is, paragraph, spelling. And what I'll do so that I don't actually save these is have these fixed when you guys see them. I won't be saving the final copy, so that you get the version that I'm showing you right now. All right, then we have 6 is punctuation. We want quotations before and after the passage. Let's see what's happening there on line 6. Line 6, it's the name of the article. So yes, you would want to do that. And we're going to catch all of them? No. I just wanted to show you I could uh, go from possibly a 1 to a 2 in the subjective grading. Whoops. Trying to just go back and forth here. All right, the next, we're going to go to line 7 through 9, and we're going to put the evidence in quotations. 7 through 9, k, comma, k, quotation, and then k, capital. What do I mean by that? Let me kind of show it to you with my little highlighting, my bouncy ball. Um, Whenever you're quoting text, it's sort of like uh, quotations when someone's talking. So the location is mentioned first, and this one is is just general, the passage, because over here in the line before it tells you the exact location. Paragraph 3, k, comma, k, quotation, k, capital. Kino, comma, her family, Chemo, and their dad Johnny had to flee the inferno that was surrounding their home. Since the next one is a different uh, passage, the other passage, then of course I would go ahead and make sure that I put the closing quotation marks. Scroll up a little bit so I can work on the next portion. Let's see what other kinds of mistakes. And, if you're going to be printing this out, the student can have their finished copy, and this would be side by side. You can print this front and back. You see the dotted lines there, so you can, once you print it out, you can separate it for them and attach it to the essay, or at least give it to them with their essay so that they can make some of these changes. Line 10 is 2 punctuations. We're going to put a quotation after flood and a quotation before the. Thanks for your patience. Quotation after flood. And because of the article, the name of the article, and quotation before the, because it's comma, quotation, capital, we're mentioning the evidence there. Go a little faster since we're getting the idea now. I'll switch back and forth. Line 12, punctuation. Remove the quotation mark before the, since that is the second sentence as part of quoted evidence. Okay. And a lot of kids make silly mistakes like that. We're going to remove the quotation mark before the on line 12. Line 12, because this is 2 sentences in a row of evidence, you don't need to have another quotation mark. That the quoted evidence starts on line 10 here, and it does not finish until line 13. Keep doing that. I'm trying to switch back and forth. All right. Line 15, spelling heart breaking. Let's see what we had here. 15, heart, space, and then breaking is in your car, breaking is with your heart. Line 16, families. There's a drop the Y and add IES rule that needs to happen. That's line 16. And again, like I mentioned, you could do this a little bit faster if they were side by side, but I just wanted you to see one thing at a time so that your students would be able to go back and fix these mistakes that either you or a partner or a team helped them find in terms of suggestions and feedback. Line 18, a combination of spelling slash punctuation belongings is plural. Let's see what I mean by that on line 18. Belongings. A lot of kids, they want to add, instead of something being plural, you see my hand there with multiple fingers up, they try to make it singular possessive. And so have some teachable moments of instruction where they learn the difference between singular, plural, singular possessive, or some one thing owns that, or plural possessive. The reason I'm putting possess my hand up in the air is there's a apostrophe or a contraction up there, and the singular or plural are down here, singular or plural. All right, let's see what else is there to help us. Line 19. Line 19 is a spelling error, friends. And so will this make a 1 into a 2 or a 2 into a 3 in conventions? No, because you can't get 3 points in conventions, but you can get 2 points. And so if the reader was going to give this paper a 1, some of these mistakes that were fixed could possibly change it into a 2. Okay. Line 20, spelling neighbors. That's an often difficult one for kids to work on. Neighbors. N-E-I-G-H, neighbors. Almost done. I keep switching from the essay to my blank computer screen. Yes, I need to organize my files. Don't pick on me. 2 more and we're done. All right. 24, spelling of articles. Okay. So you remember in the passage, it'll say read the article or read the articles. And so your kids should be able to use that to know how to spell something since it's actually there. Just remind them that if you have your passage here, then you want your, whatever, if you're taking something from the title or the italics, or the passage paragraphs, then have it side by side, because what sometimes happens is the paragraph is over here, or the paragraph that you're referring to is off the screen, and then your box is down here, and so that makes it hard. Make sure that they're side by side so your students can actually transfer information over without having lots of mistakes. Okay, so 24 articles spelling and 25 there. Let's fix those at the same time since we don't have a short memory. 24 articles, there it is, articles, and 25, that is a common mistake that I see students make, so I made some of these mistakes on purpose. Okay, and I believe that has a period afterwards. Yeah, it's just below the line. Okay, so that's the end of that. So it is entirely possible that the essay would get a 1 in the rough draft, because of the organization development where the evidence is not related enough to the explanation. And the conventions were, there were too many conventions mistakes. And again, that's why I like the numbers. You saw that I was able to quickly go to the lines. And of course, the first time you do something, it's always going to take a while. But as you start practicing something, whenever you get ET, extraterrestrial, no, extra time or extra times doing something, then you're going to become more efficient at it. And so that quick check rubric, as you saw, it it's pretty quick and it's pretty practical in terms of the feedback that you can give your students. So what are we going to do next? We that was closing our lesson on how to get a 5 through 7. My next couple of videos are going to be secondary, how to get 8s, 9s, and 10s. How do we take what we've gotten so far and what would a student in a middle to higher ability to be able to do so that there can be more quality and quantity in the essay to have a better chance to get an 8, 9, or a 10. And so what I'll be doing on that one is I'll be using the the lined paper that is smaller, where it's got 40 lines on each page. And a lot of students, you can see that they'll have maybe 7, 8, 10 sentences and still get good scores. But I wanted to show you what would it look like in terms of the student. I only have to write that one essay. We're going to be working 2 semesters with our kids. And unfortunately, those 2 semesters of modeling and teaching and guidance, it's all going to come down to about 2 minutes or even less, where a computer grading system called automated scoring engine will score it, or a human 25% of the time, or if there's some red flags, some things that went wrong in the scoring. So tune in for our next couple of videos where it'll be about how to get 8s, 9s, and 10s using that same passage, the prompt, and to be able to produce a product that's got a better chance for a higher score. Thank you guys, and God bless.